one of the things that I have been working on all of my professional life and all of my ministry life is, can we build an anti-racist, more just society, one in which everyone has enough? We recently commemorated Dr. King's birthday, and it was his assassination, friends, that really traumatized me and catalyzed me to think, man, if you can murder love, we're in the wrong kind of nation. And we must, as people of faith and moral courage, be working to make a fully welcoming, fully anti-racist, safe, flourishing community. And as part of my journey, I remember reading books by this incredibly smart human named Jemar Tisby. Um, just prolific, relatable, straightforward, on my bookshelf as part of the things that I study and go back to again and again. And then it turns out that I join the board of PRRI, Public Religion Research Institute, and Jemar's on the board. And then it turns out that we're in a fellowship together. And now we're senior democracy fellows together at PRRI. And when I hear Jemar speak in a room or in the digital spaces, I hear fire. I hear truth. I hear wisdom. I hear bold declarations. I hear fearless calling us in from his place as a PhD in history about what history can teach us for such a time as this. So in this Black History Month, I'm like Janet, can't wait to hear Jemar talk to us in our 6-month anti-racism series at Middle Church. He's going to be talking about 5 lessons that we can learn from Black history that help us counteract authoritarianism now. So I welcome my friend, my colleague, one of my heroes, Jemar Tisby. Hey.
Thank you for the kind words of introduction, and thank you for this opportunity to speak on this incredibly important topic to these incredibly beautiful people. Hello, beautiful people of Middle
Hello, beautiful
Church
people.
and beyond. So
Yeah.
glad that you are here. I'm so glad to be doing this in collaboration with my friend and sister, Reverend Jacqui. So we're going to go on a journey tonight. Thank
Yes.
you for making the time. I hope you brought your seatbelts. Keep your legs and arms inside the vehicle at all times. Listen, folks, um, this is not a lecture, this is a training. And so I'm going to be as practical as I can be. I will be drawing lessons from the history of the Black church, but broadly, I'm going to give you a framework drawn from my second book, How to Fight Racism. And then the hard work begins because it's up to you to apply this. I'm going to say this at the front end. You are absolutely wasting your time if you do nothing with this. You are absolutely wasting your time if all you do is listen.
I'm going
I don't
off
know.
camera so I can focus.
I don't know why you would just, come to a training and not put into practice some of the tools you've been given. But that's between you and God. I'm just going to give you this content. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen and we are going to dive right in because I'm going to do my best to discipline myself such that we have more time for Q&A, more time for conversation, more time for what you want to talk about. And so, all right, put in the chat. What 2 objects do you see? Type it in the chat. What 2 objects do you see? Yeah, I told you it's going to be a training. You're not going to be just sitting there. I'm sorry. If you thought you were just going to turn this on while you do the dishes or fold laundry, actually, snaps for you because I would procrastinate on both of those as long as I possibly could, especially the folding laundry part. My goodness. What 2 objects do you see? All right, I see light switch and smoke alarm. Yep, or smoke detector. Good, 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 good. This wasn't a trick question. You got it. You got it. Now, the question is for you to type in the chat, what is the difference between a light switch and a smoke detector? What is the difference between a light switch and a smoke detector? Now, this one requires a little bit more thinking. One part about sharing my screen is that it always makes the arrow invisible. So it's covering the chat. Okay, detector is reactive, switch is proactive, switch activates, smoke detector detects potential danger. One responds to motion, the other to smoke. One is in your control, one isn't directly good. Good. Control to illuminate, responds to fire, switcher, detector. Awesome. Yeah, y'all got your thinking caps on tonight. Here's how I describe the difference between a light switch and a smoke detector. A light switch you can turn on and you can turn off. And isn't that often our approach to fighting racism? Remember the summer of 2020? Was the light switch on or off? Drop that in the chat. Summer 2020, was the light switch for fighting racism on or off in the summer of 2020? Yep, on. Remember that those racial justice uprisings? And as a matter of fact, today is the anniversary of when Ahmaud Arbery was killed. So it was Ahmaud Arbery, it was Breonna Taylor, it was George Floyd, all within that spring. And this is summer during COVID. We got out of our houses and stopped social distancing en masse to protest racial injustice, finally, right? And then what's so interesting to me, that was all through 2020. And by the way, those weren't just national protests, those were global, those were international protests against racism. And no sooner does the calendar turn from December 2020 do we get January 6th, 2021. As a historian, I'm always looking at timing and I'm always looking at cause and effect. We're not out of bounds to say that January 6th was white lash to the summer of 2020. Multiple factors at play, but still, that sort of whiplash or white lash from the light switch being on to being slammed off. And now we get all this anti-DEI stuff, everything regarding race being called woke in a negative way, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a light switch. And even apart from these massive racial justice uprisings, just in our regular lives, right? Fighting racism is hard. It takes intention, it takes time, it takes energy, and we've got a lot of other stuff to do, from going to work to going to school to caring for parents to caring for children to getting to games and sports events on time. All of these things, right? We have a lot of other issues to worry about on top of that particular issue of racism as an injustice. And so even just for regular people who are concerned about racism, so often we can click that light switch off. But a smoke detector is different. A light switch you can flip on and off, but a smoke detector is always on. A smoke detector is always on. And even when the battery is about to run out, what happens? That darn beep will not let you rest until you change the battery so that it can stay on. Why? Because a smoke detector is absolutely useless if it's off. A smoke detector always has to be on to detect smoke or to detect danger anytime it could happen. So, what I'm saying is that when it comes to fighting racism, we need to move from a light switch mentality to a smoke detector mentality. A light switch mentality that flicks it on when it's convenient, when it's popular, when everyone else is doing it, or flicks it off as soon as the regular rhythms of life get in the way, or it gets harder, or we have to sacrifice, right? No, we have to go to a smoke detector mentality where we are always going to be vigilant, always going to be sensitive, always going to be conscious, always going to be aware whenever racism may appear so that we can sound the alarm and do something about it. All right? So if you don't remember anything else, you use that one. Just give me attribution and we're off. So when we talk about fighting racism, so often we are looking for the big thing. Hashtag TM registered trademark. The big thing, whatever that is. It's the single policy. It's the one protest. It's the one dramatic gesture that's going to fix everything. And finally, we're going to see a difference. But here's the real thing. Lasting change most often happens through small, consistent acts of courage. It's not the one big thing. It's the many, 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 many little things, habits even, done over time that make the difference. One step at a time. So, what I'm about to unpack to you is called the arc of racial justice. Arc of racial justice. Somebody type ARC, all caps, arc of racial justice in the chat. Type arc, ARC, all caps, of racial justice. All right. So it's an acronym that stands for awareness, relationships, commitment. Awareness, relationships, commitment. Thank you, Jamie. Got it all in there. Greg got it all in there. There we go. The arc of racial justice. And that's what we're going to unpack. This is the framework that you're going to understand by the end of this workshop. Let me see. Oops. I lost the chat for a second and I don't want to lose you. All right. So that is a two-legged stool. Anybody want to try sitting on it? Nah. Two-legged stool is going to be way more work than it's worth. You need at least three legs to have a stable foundation. That is the same with any of our racial justice efforts. You can't just have one, you can't just have two. You need all three: awareness, relationships, commitment, in order to have a stable foundation to build your racial justice efforts on. I'm giving you these visuals to help you remember. All right. Like I said before, this is the framework that's coming from my second book, How to Fight Racism. How to Fight Racism. And just so you know, there is a young readers edition to this called How to Fight Racism, Young Readers Edition, a guide to standing up for racial justice. This Young Readers Edition is good for kids ages 8 and up. And almost to a person, the adults who I know who are serious about justice started when they were a kid. They learned it from some adult in their life, a parent, a guardian, a coach, a teacher, a mentor. So the earlier we can have these conversations, the more likely it is that our young people grow up with the right mindsets, right mentality, that smoke detector mentality rather than the light switch mentality. So how to fight racism. This is my response to the question I get most frequently whenever I speak. And that question is simply, what do we do? So I'll be giving a talk on my first book, The Color of Compromise, or I'll be giving a talk on my latest area of research, white Christian nationalism. And I'll get to the end of the talk and I've got all this history and all of this sociology and data and all of this theology. And the one question inevitably that comes up every single time is, what do we do? So I decided to answer that with a book. Um, but here's the thing. Whenever people would ask me that question, there were a few problems I encountered in trying to respond to that question. What do we do? What do we do about racism? What do we do about anti-racism? What do we do about fighting for justice? Few issues. Number one, people like me, the ones who give workshops, the one who write books, we tend to focus on diagnosing the problem with little time or attention paid to addressing the problem in terms of solutions. Now, part of this is by necessity, right? Part of this, like in my first book, The Color of Compromise, we got to lay out the long history of racism in the church because if you don't accurately understand the problem, you cannot provide a helpful solution. So we do need to take time to understand what went wrong. But that also means we have relatively less time to understand or talk about how to make things right. So that's one issue. Another issue is that when we talk about taking action, it tends to be disorganized and coherent and incoherent. In other words, whenever I would get that question, what do we do about racism? Whatever talk I was giving, I would answer it differently every single time because something new would come across the headlines, or I would have just read something, or we were in a context that said, this particular solution. And and it was often disjointed, right? Like I would say one thing, around voting, one thing around personal interactions, one thing around mindsets. Like it was, listen, our brains are efficiency machines. They do not like confusion. And so what would happen is when I gave this random smattering of like, do this, try that, do this, nobody would even remember it, much less take action on it. We can't remember information if it's disorganized like that. So I said, and the other thing is so contextual. Like if you're in New York City, what you do is going to be vastly different than where I am just for a couple of days, Alexandria, Louisiana. I ain't never even heard of this town before I got here. Um, but the solutions aren't necessarily cut and paste from one context to another. All that to say, instead of giving you 50 11 bullet points of potential actions you could take, I thought it might be more helpful to think in terms of a framework. And that's where the arc of racial justice comes in. It's a way of organizing anti-racist action so you can actually take action. A way of organizing anti-racist action so you can actually take action. Now, as I go into this, and I'll explain awareness, relationships, commitment in turn, understand three caveats. Number one, this is not linear. You don't move from awareness, then relationships, then commitment. There's a very Western European way of thinking that is all sequential, all linear. It ain't like that. You can jump in at any point. You can start with relationships. You can move to commitment, and you can go to awareness. You can start to relate with awareness and move to commitment and go to relationships. Wherever you get in where you fit in. It's not linear. Number two, it's never done. You never graduate from fighting racism. You never get the terminal degree that says, I'm done. I got the certificate, I mastered it, I did my time. You're always learning. And then lastly, this often happens simultaneously. Think of a book study. Let's say you pick up How to Fight Racism for your book study. Well, does that fall under which category? Awareness, relationships, commitment. I would argue all three. Why? Because you're reading a book, that's increasing your awareness. But if you're doing it in a group, you're building relationships. But inevitably, if you've ever been part of a study like that, you always ask, well, now what do we do? Now you're getting into the commitment part. So this is why I say most of this happens simultaneously, awareness relationships. So I just wanted you to remember it's not linear, you're never done, and it can often happen simultaneously. Now, with those caveats, let's dive in. Awareness, knowledge, information, and info required to fight racism, right? This is pretty straightforward. If you think of examples of awareness, that's watching this training, that is watching a documentary, that's participating in a book study. Anything you do to get the knowledge, the information, the data required to fight racism. So here's your next assignment in the chat. Give me one action you can take to build awareness that's required to fight racism. Give me one action that someone could take to build awareness for fighting racism. Drop that in the chat. There we go. Okay. Call out microaggressions, participating today, talk about this Zoom storytelling, listen to affected folks. Absolutely. Awesome. Yeah, you're starting to get it. Awareness is kind of the easiest thing. It's the lowest hanging fruit. And that's fine, but we can't just stay there. So let's talk about relationships. If I have that slide. Yeah, I didn't do that. Okay, so let's talk about relationships. All justice is relational. We have to see the shared humanity in other people and form coalitions so that we can take on a society rife with bigotry. All justice is relational. I want you to get this because why do we do justice? Why do we do, what is even the point? Is it to be self-righteous and say we're better than the other person? That we are more justice-minded than the next person? No, 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 no. It is about relationships. What's the greatest commandment? Love God, love your neighbor. Doing justice is a way of demonstrating your love for God and neighbor. And here's my example. When God wanted to reconcile a people to God, what did God do? God didn't send a tweet. God didn't make a TikTok video. God sent the Son, incarnate, human. Why? Why? Why did Jesus have to be human? So that he could be where we are and develop a relationship with people so that he could know us and we could know him. And do you know that the promise of Jesus is that all relationships will be restored? Our relationship to God, our relationship to each other, our relationship to creation, even our relationship to ourselves will be restored. We cannot forget all justice is relational. Then, commitment. Now, when you hear commitment, you might hear stay the course, be faithful, don't quit. It means that, but not in this context. In this context, commitment means a commitment to dismantling racist systems, structures, policies, institutions. Dismantling racist systems, structures, policies, institutions. In other words, it means going beyond the individual and interpersonal. Hello, somebody. It's not just whether you use the N word. It's not just whether some of your best friends are black.
Mm-hmm.
It's about systems and policies. All right. Now I'm going to go through these examples real quickly. Okay. All right. We talked about awareness. Let me give you a historical example of awareness. Everybody knows Ida B. Wells Barnett. Do you know her origin story, though? Because it has everything to do with awareness. So, she's born in the 19th century into poverty. Her tragic story is both of her parents die from yellow fever. She's the oldest child. She ends up having to take care of everybody. So you can understand kind of the eldest child mindset she already has. She teaches for a while, but then she gets into journalism. Now she's living in Memphis, but while she's away on a trip, something tragic happens. She's good friends with a black man and his wife, um, and they are co-owners of a grocery store in Memphis. Now, the grocery store is doing well. There's a white owned grocery store nearby. And because they practice racism and segregation and discrimination, all the black people are going to this black owned grocery store and it's cutting into this white man's business. And so they come up with an excuse and they take Ida B. Wells' friend and his two co-owners just outside of town and they lynch them. Ida B. Wells hears of this. She's absolutely broken by this, but she doesn't let it stop her. Instead, she writes. She writes and writes and writes all the things you're not supposed to say, including the fact that this was an unjust lynching and mob murder because black business owners had the audacity to have some success in business. And she told the truth. And for that, they destroyed the office where she worked out of, and they told her, you get out of Memphis, if you ever come back, we'll kill you. And she leaves. But again, she doesn't stop. She puts words on paper and she becomes an investigative journalist who probably did more than any other single person to reveal the horrors of lynching in the Jim Crow era. Because you see, folks, all of the newspapers, all of the major media outlets were white supremacists. They weren't telling the real story. They were telling the story that the white lynchers told them to say. Oftentimes outright lies, oftentimes accusations of black men sexually assaulting white women, which wasn't the case. So Ida B. Wells told the truth. That's why I have her as our example under awareness. If we want to learn how to resist authoritarianism from Black history, it's tell the truth. And it's not just Ida B. Wells. You can think of people like Frederick Douglass, Olaudah Equiano, Phyllis Wheatley. These are people who wrote about their experiences under enslavement and revealed to people the reality that they weren't aware of. They were telling the truth. We would call this in the church witness. We would call this in the church testimony. Do you know you don't have to be a scholar? You don't have to be a historian. You don't have to be a theologian. You can tell the truth of your own experience and be a witness. Do not. This is what we learned from Ida B. Wells. This is what we learned from Black history. Do not let the oppressor narrate your experience. Somebody type that in the chat. Do not let the oppressor narrate your experience. You see how I get worked up. I ain't even sitting. I'm standing. I'm standing tonight. I knew I couldn't sit still. Do not let the oppressor narrate your experience. That's what we learned from Black history. That's what we learned from Ida B. Wells. That's what we learned from so many of the folks who told the truth. And by the way, telling the truth was life-threatening. So let me give you some practical aspects under awareness. Here's one thing, and I'm going to move quickly after this. Number one, learn Black history thematically, not sporadically. Type that in the chat. Learn Black history thematically, not sporadically. Thematically, not sporadically. What do I mean by this? Here's how we do Black history wrong.
Hmm.
All through Black History Month, you get these random facts, tidbits, factoids about Black history. That is the
Mhm.
worst way to teach history. Just like trying to give people this random smattering of actions to take to fight racism, it's not organized and you can't remember it. But more deeply, history is story. Stories go together, beginning, middle, end, character, plot development, all of that stuff. That's history too. So what happens when you take one event out? It's like watching a movie and you cut one scene out and you watch that scene and think you know what the whole thing is about. That's how we treat Black history and it ticks me off. So learn Black history thematically, not sporadically. What does that mean? Do you know that Carter G. Woodson in 1915 founded an organization that is now called the Association for African American Life and History, or ASALH, ASALH.org, ASALH.org. They are the originators of Black History Month, which began as Negro History Week in 1926. It is now 2026, which means the theme for this year's Black History Month is 100 years of Black history commemorations. And if you go to asalh.org, you can go to a menu that says Black History Month themes, and you can see the themes for 2027, 2028, 2029. You can go back and see the themes from 2025, 2024, 2023. So learn Black history thematically, not sporadically. If you want to know what theme to choose, because there are many themes to choose, then go to asala.org. And that'll give you a better narrative and not just tidbits or factoids about Black history. Number two, about awareness. Conduct an institutional history. I think Middle Church should probably have already done this, but especially our churches, our denominations, our counties, our businesses, there's a history there. Oftentimes that history is interwoven with some sort of racial topic. You could be pleasantly surprised and have a tradition of resisting racism, or you could uncover some kind of embarrassing facts that you can at least confess and repent of and do better in the present. But know your institutional history. Um, and lastly, if I can cover this briefly, there's something called the Universities Studying Slavery Consortium. Universities Studying Slavery Consortium. This started in 2014 at the University of Virginia. Long story short, they are historic universities that are looking at their entanglements with slavery. So many of these historic universities enslaved people and made money off them or exploited their labor. And so they're going back, learning the names, learning the stories of these enslaved people, honoring them today, and sometimes even doing reparations in the form of scholarships. I want to see a churches studying slavery consortium. I want to see historic churches going back in their past and saying, what was our interaction with slavery? Now, some churches in the North, maybe you were on the Underground Railroad. Maybe you sent missionaries down to help start HBCUs. It could be positive. I don't know. But the key
Mhm.
with this consortium is you work together. A lot of our churches are doing this anti-slavery work in isolation.
Mhm.
A consortium comes together and shares best practices. Now I got to move, but I love this verse, John 8:32, and you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Type in the chat, what is the opposite of this verse? It doesn't have to be another Bible verse, but just what's the opposite of knowing the truth and the truth set you free? Ignorance. What's the opposite of knowing the truth and set you free? Avoidance. Jamie says the lies that bind you. That's poetic. Lies will enslave you. Lie, yes, yes. Ignorant and stuck. Absolutely. If you go to verse 33, his listeners are like, but we are the children of Abraham. We've never been enslaved. We don't need to be set free. Right there, they're telling you A, they're ignorant, and B, they're in bondage to their sin. So I would rather know the truth. So that's what awareness is about. All right, relationships. I'm gonna go through this one quickly. Um, I love this one. Here, I'm gonna tell you another story. Most people haven't heard of Charles Hamilton Houston, but have you heard of Thurgood Marshall? Have you heard of Brown versus the Board of Education?
Mhm.
So Charles Hamilton Houston is Thurgood Marshall's mentor. Thurgood Marshall argues Brown v. Board before the Supreme Court. But the strategy of Brown v. Board was devised by Charles Hamilton Houston. The strategy of Brown v. Board was not segregation is morally unjust. The strategy that led to Brown v. Board was separate but equal. They challenged the equal part. They didn't challenge the separate part. Separate but equal, Plessy v. Ferguson said you had to provide separate facilities that were equal to white facilities. And of course, we know that never happens because ultimately what you're talking about is funding two identical systems, one for black and one for white, and they never had that much money. And even if they did, they weren't going to equally apportion it to black people. So Charles Hamilton Houston was a lawyer. He was born in DC. His daddy was a doctor. His mom was a homemaker. He was relatively affluent by standards of the day. And he was very intelligent. He graduates as one of like five valedictorians from his class, UMass Amherst, I believe. And then he goes on, he's in the military, but he experiences such acute racism in the military that he says, I'm never going to be a victim like that again. So he becomes a lawyer and he goes to Harvard Law School. And he's the first black person to be on the editorial board of the Harvard Law Review. Then he gets a job at Howard University. Howard University is an HBCU. He takes it from an unaccredited night school to the premier law school for black people, yes, but overall, one of the very best law schools in the country, black or white. So influential that at one time, 25% of all black lawyers came through Howard Law. 25%. And Charles Hamilton Houston had this philosophy that lawyers were to be social engineers. Somebody type that phrase, social engineers, by which he meant, look, if you come into law school to learn the law so you can get rich, this is not the place for you. You are to use the law as an instrument to make society better. That was his approach and that was his philosophy. He also served as legal counsel of the NAACP. He helped lead their efforts to prosecute lynchings and segregation cases. And one of his many students, Thurgood Marshall, who becomes the first Black Supreme Court justice eventually. So, why do I mention Charles Hamilton Houston in the relationships category? Because when we think of relationships, we are typically thinking one-to-one. Charles Hamilton Houston built institutional relationships. He was able to bring together places like Howard Law School and the NAACP. He was able to leverage his position with institutions to create even bigger impact. That's how also we need to be thinking about relationships. So on a practical level, who can Middle Church partner with for greater impact as a church, as an institution, not just as one-on-one, right? But one-on-one relationships are important. I love this one, and I'll just go through this quickly. Remember when I said it's more than just saying some of my best friends are black? This is an article I first read in the Washington Post some years back called Hardly Any of My Friends Are Black. What this graph is showing is that in a 100 friend scenario, imagine you have 100 friends. If you're a white person, 91 of those friends is white. 91. And then you have one each, one black friend, one Latino friend, one Asian friend, one mixed race friend, and three friends of an unknown race. The average black person has 83 black friends, eight white friends, two Latino friends, zero Asian friends, three mixed race friends, one other race friend, and four friends of an unknown race. So what we see here is that whatever racial or ethnic group you're part of, the majority of your friends are going to be in the same racial or ethnic group. That's just sociology. But what we also see is black people have 8 times more white friends than white people have black friends. You got one black friend on average. We got 8 white people. Now, black and Asian, we got to get together. But come on. But here's one more stat. A full 75% of whites have entirely white social networks. 75% have entirely white social networks without any minority presence. So the one point I want to make here is that diversity in your relationships will not simply happen. You have to make it happen. You got to shop at different places. You got to go to different hairdressers and barbers. You got to go to different churches. You got to go out of your way to make it happen. Join different sports leagues, different gyms, all of that. And then lastly, commitment. Dismantling the laws, policies, practices that keep us racially separate and unequal, and instituting rules that lead to greater equity. I don't really have time to go into this, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, but the good news is I have an article coming out on it tomorrow. So if you subscribe to jamartisby.substack.com, you can subscribe for free. You're going to get an article on this in the morning. Yes, Reverend Jacqui, that's Fannie Lou Hamer on holding the flag, and next to her is the great Ella Baker. Now, if you look in the background, if you can see, it says Freedom Democratic Party. They're in Jackson, Mississippi at the state caucus that they held before, just prior to going to the Democratic National Convention in 1964 in Atlantic City. But what I'm trying to say here is that Mississippi was the most thoroughly authoritarian state in terms of the government that we can think of at the time. What that meant was, even though it had the highest percentage or proportion of black people of any state, only 5% of eligible black voters were registered to vote in the 1960s. Only 5%. They had so thoroughly locked out black people from political participation that only 5% were registered to vote. So they formed the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party as an alternative and a parallel. And the point I'm making in tomorrow's article is 2 things. Number one, they practice political realism. And number two, they never gave up on working the system until the system worked for them. This argues against apathy. This argues against cynicism. How dare we? How dare we get so fed up in the political process that we dishonor the effort, the suffering, the sacrifice of people like Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker, who, by the way, were laboring under a system even more oppressive than the one we're looking at now. And yet they didn't give up hope. That's commitment. All right. The last thing I'll say is this. We can go through all the practical steps, but when it comes to fighting racism, we don't have a how-to problem, we have a want-to problem. If I asked each of you to come up with practical ways to fight racism, you could all do it. You could all come up with something and it would probably be helpful. The how-to is not the question. The want-to is the problem because it requires courage. Because fighting racism in a country founded on white supremacy is never easy. And it's few people who are willing to actively be part of the solution, because that also means accepting the consequences. You will lose money, jobs, relationships, a church community, family relationships. sometimes even your health. But if we learn anything about resisting authoritarianism from Black history, it's that courage can be cultivated. It's not some mystical thing that's reserved for a few people. All of us can cultivate courage. And it happens one small action at a time. Thank you for this time. I did my best to move quickly, but I want to make sure that we have a couple minutes to have a conversation. I'm willing to stay over a couple minutes past the hour, Reverend Jacqui, if you want. And just, yeah, appreciate your time. The arc of racial justice.
Jemar, thank you so much.
Let me stop sharing. Yes.
Hi, I'm doing that. Amazing. Thank you. How y'all doing with this? Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah. My
Questions, comments, criticisms, concerns. Bring it on.
Bring it on, bring on. I want to just say thank you. Yeah, right. So powerful. Good. And mommy picked cotton with Fannie Lou Hamer. Sang in the choir
Mm,
with Fannie Lou Hamer. Uncle George walked down the dusty roads of Sunflower County, registering people to vote with Fannie Lou Hamer. And that
not
part,
that long ago.
nope, yesterday, love. Yesterday, right? So, friends, let me just give a moment for you to put in the chat a burning question, because I think that might, then we can just gather them up. Like, what do you want to say back to Jamara for this? Wow, so much wonderful, amazing information, organized and presented. That's right. Amen. Thank you. Lots of thank yous. Does anybody have a question? Yeah, that's right, Jamie. Jamie's the Reverend Jamie Kaufman. Anybody have a question for Jamara? Because I have one.
Yeah.
Jamara, how old are you?
Old enough to know better.
Oh, but on purpose. Like why? How old are you? 40 something, 50 something?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I'm 66 and I'm just trying to put on the table. Is there a difference, do you think, Jamar, in the way people of my generation, like I'm 10 years old when I'm 8 years old when King is killed, right? I mean,
Mm.
are young people, are younger people connected to the arc of history in the way you hope they would be? Is my question.
Yeah. I think there, so I'm a millennial,
Mhm.
and we were born into a legally desegregated society.
Right, right, right. Yep.
So generations past would have had some overlap. Even the eldest Gen Xers
Right.
had overlap with segregation.
Yep.
So my generation learned that the way up was assimilation.
Wow. Jamar. Huh.
It was so like my dad worked in a cubicle in a corporate office job.
Right, right.
He couldn't remind people he was black. He had to be dressed the same way, talk the same way, just to get the foot in the door, right? And that's where the generation was. And it was because his generation did that that I'm able to kind of be outspoken, right? But I've had to unlearn a lot of that. Um, or at least build on it, if you want to put it that way. I also wonder if um, there's as much institutional memory of the Black church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Hmm.
every generation, the Black people are still like the most religious Christian demographic, right?
Right.
But even with us, it's less. And
That's
so
right.
you have fewer and fewer people, quote unquote, growing up in the church. And so
Yes.
we don't have that sort of cultural memory
Yeah.
where a lot of our history was taught. And then lastly, I think this is just true with every successive generation. They think we're past these problems.
Yeah.
And they look around and like, I got Asian friends and Mexican friends and, you know, bisexual friends. Like, you know, what y'all are talking about, it doesn't apply to us until they get pulled over,
Right. That's
until
right.
they get profiled for speaking Spanish, right? It does still matter, but when you're young and you see the diversity around you, you don't think it matters.
Or shot in the back of the head in Grand Rapids, right? Just Emmett Tilled. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
So there's a lack of context, I would call it, and a lot of history is the context that we need.
Amen. I saw two hands up, and I want to know if you all could speak those questions real quick. Cheryl and who was it?
Yeah, I think I can speak my question quickly. I thought it was real interesting the slide you had about the white and black and who your friends are and how many. I grew up in the predominantly white middle class suburbs of Connecticut,
Mm.
so
Yeah.
I hardly have any black friends. But
Mhm.
I also, at the same time, I worry about black people who don't have any white friends. It's to kind of like keep to yourself in like by us for us. I think that's a very short-sighted, way to go. And yeah, I mean, at the same time, it was like surprising. About 75% of white people, they all their friends, they don't know people of color. That was a little bit scary. So I don't. There's a
What's your
question there
Hey,
somewhere.
question, love, so I can ask Mark to put his question in the room too. What's your question, my love?
A church that I served in Houston is going through a lot of racial issues. And as they're trying, some younger people are trying to contest this. They were pulled aside for what they're wearing, how they're standing, for etiquette, which is just crazy that this church is doing that. But some of the people of color on staff and a couple and on the board have said, "Oh, there's no racism in this church." And so then the power structure is like, "Oh, see, they said there's no racism, so there's no racism."
So what's your question, Mark? You and Cheryl both are getting at like what do we do next, right? What
Yes, yes. How do you address that when they're
address a more multiracial life, and how do we address people saying there's no racism? Did I get that right, friends?
That's good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we use the arc of racial justice on both of those, awareness, relationships, commitment. So, what Cheryl's getting at is a lack of relationships.
Right.
And this one is a little bit reversed, where Black people are sort of huddling up with only other Black people. To which I would say, number one, it's more a question of consciousness than counting
Mm.
uh, people, right? So this would go for white people too. Part of the reason why 75% of white people only have white networks is because they might live in Iowa. That's like 91% white. Ain't nobody around. Although that's changing. There's a larger Latino culture in even those areas. But anyway, point being, what do you do when there's just not the geographical proximity to other people? You can still cultivate consciousness of other cultures. Still cultivate sensitivity,
Right. Have
right?
the books, have a relationship with the music, right?
And
Right.
I'm a huge proponent of pilgrimages. Go to Montgomery to the Lynching Memorial and Museum. Go do a Southern Civil Rights tour. Go around your own town and look at the historical markers, right? So there are many ways to cultivate that if you don't have the numbers. The second thing I'll say to that about Black kids is, Beverly Daniel Tatum, her book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? It's really helpful because she talks about racial identity development. And there's actually a healthy stage of developing a healthy racial identity where you are focused on people like you because it is helping you develop a firm, positive self-image as a Black person that then will allow you and empower you to go out into a predominantly white setting and not lose yourself. So there can be healthy stages of that. And then to the other question, it's really tricky because we always, the power structure will always use mascots and tokenism to reinforce the status quo. And the real question is, are those folks who say there's no racism here, are they um, the norm or are they the exception that proves the norm? Right? This is this is the what do you do about the Tim Scotts, Senator Tim Scott and Clarence Thomases of the world. Because you can point to them, see, those are black men who say racism is woke and it's a thing of the past. So clearly there's no problem. Actually, they might say that, but they're the exception that proves the rule.
Right.
They aren't representative.
Right.
And so, yeah, you're going to always get a spectrum. And then we can't discount the people who say they've experienced racism, like whether you agree with it or not. The first response is empathy and listening, and then hopefully some change.
I love that, Jemar.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for raising that. There is a kind of amnesia and denial. I'll put those two together, right? Amnesia about where we've been, and just we're still here. And I think the one thing that I would want to say to everybody who listens to this today, you have this to share. Like you got some Jemar Tisby wisdom to share in your world. And that's relationship, right? Jemar, and awareness, right? And the denial of the blatant anti-Black racism, especially in America right now. If we participate in that, guys, I heard Jemar saying strap in. I'm saying strap in. If you can't say out loud in your networks, this ain't over yet,
My God.
that is, especially in the name of the brown Jesus,
Don't
you better get it
forget that part.
together.
And I'll say one more thing, Mark. This is my theory. All black people, we're trying to figure out how to survive white supremacy. Most of us do it by naming it, calling it out, resisting it. Some of us do it by um, proximity to it, by
Just to,
getting close to
right?
it and getting the advantages of it.
And to say, friend, from our ancestors, before proximity meant power, proximity meant in the South just living to talk about it the next day, right?
Mhm.
I cannot push the envelope and go to work and clean that Betty's house, right? That's real too. I want to tell you all that if you don't go to Jemar Tisby's Substack and sign up, you are missing. Um, and if you want to know more, I know that Jemar and I are going to both post this beautiful conversation in our Substacks tomorrow. And you know what, loves, just to say, I'm going to go two talks. One, nice white people, we're counting on you to be smarter, no matter how much you've trained, no matter how much you know, there's more to know. And when you know it, you can share it. That's evangelism.
Yeah.
Two, Jamar's a historian, but did you hear him drop some God talk?
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I
This,
did get my MDiv.
you did, you got it. This right here, if you're a person of faith and you're not trying to dig into this stuff right now, I'm just asking you to pray about that. And three, people of color, what Jamar did was gave us a way to talk about this in our worlds.
Mm.
To our old Black aunties who, girl, we just supposed to, girl, I can't. And also to the people in your contemporary circle, all of us have a role to teach. That's what I'm trying to say. All of us have some transformative language to have, some good talk to have, some confrontation to have if we're going to make an anti-racist society. Jamar, you get to have the last word. What is it, friend?
First of all, Reverend Jacqui, you are brilliant. You are a gift to the church. Your open-heartedness, you're willing to come alongside. And I'll tell y'all this, in all of our meetings, Reverend Jacqui is a pastor.
Oh,
She's asking how people are doing. She is encouraging folks. She is praying for folks. So it's an honor always to be in your presence. And I look forward to coming in person in the near future.
yes, you are.
Um, my last word, y'all, is this. Take 30 minutes
Mhm.
and a sheet of paper
Mm.
and write out awareness, skip a few lines, relationships, skip a few lines, and commitment.
Mhm.
And then ask God, in the next several weeks, not too long,
Mhm.
what would you have me do to build my own awareness around race?
Oh, that's good.
What would you have me do to build relationships
Mhm.
of solidarity, whether institutionally or individually? And what would you have me commit to on a systemic and institutional level so that the actions I take don't just affect one person at a time, but can actually level the playing field for many, many people at once?
Mhm.
I call it creating a racial justice action plan.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love that. And friends, Jemar Tisby's Substack is called Footnotes, but if you just do Jemar Tisby at Substack, you're going to find him. And Zane put that in the chat. He's going to drop it one more time because chats go by fast. You can find me at Fierce Love or Jacqui Lewis at Substack. And these next months, like Jemar is our second teaching in a 6-month arc that just takes us to Juneteenth. Jemar, I want to invite you to come to that. So listen, be a student of anti-racism and know that it is an act of courage, but also it's an essential act of faith to be anti-racist in our lives. Jemar, this was great. This was
I'll be
great.
glad. I enjoyed it. Great seeing you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Look for us in Jamar's Substack Mine. We'll put this out in the world and we'll keep learning together. Take care, everybody. Good night.